I apologize. I do not have the materials open. So let me pull those open. Sorry, everybody. Got just about everything else on my computer open though. All right. Thank you, Dean. So hi, everybody. Welcome to the January 4th, 2023 meeting of the Missisquoi Basin Water Quality Council. Happy New Year. Glad you all could be here. Hope you're all sticking to your resolutions if you made any. Let's do a quick round of introductions. And while you're doing that, if you can add in, if you are voting, what organization you're with, and your pronouns if you would like to your Zoom name, that would be great. So I'll go first. Lauren Weston, Franklin County NRCD. Voting, she, her pronouns. I'll pick on Dan.
Okay. Dan, Sheila, voting. Sitting over here in Richford.
Well, Jake.
Note here. Hi, Jake Kucher. He alternate for municipalities. I believe I said that correctly.
Great. Beth.
Happy New Year, everybody. Beth Torpy, NBDA, she, her.
Kent.
Sorry, I was busy doing my renaming myself. Kent Henderson, Friends of Northern Lake Champlain, voting member.
Beautiful. Lindsay.
Lindsay White, Missisquoi River Basin Association, voting member, she, her.
Sarah.
Sarah Downs, voting member, municipalities.
Barry.
Barry Lamke, Northwest Regional Planning Commission, voting he, him.
Abraham.
Hello, Abraham Ames, voting member, Orleans County Conservation District, he, him.
Daya.
Hi, I'm Daya. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm staff.
Ellen.
Ellen Fox, I'm the MRBA alternate, she, her.
David. Ooh, we cannot hear you, unfortunately.
I'll just jump in and say Dave is now going to be the alternate on the municipal side, taking over the seat that was held by Emily Charrington.
Do you go by Dave or David? If you want to put in the chat, we'll all know. And then Katie.
Katie Calabrese, she, her. I work for EIV Technical Services, but I'm sitting in for St. Albans with Dave here.
And Tom.
Hi, Tom Briselden, Friends of Northern Lake Champlain alternate. I won't be voting today. I apologize, I may not have video today, so I'm working on it.
No worries. And Dean.
Good morning, everybody. Dean Pierce on the staff. Glad to see all of you.
Wonderful. And if you want to toss up the Zoom, oh, thank you. So again, these are the normal things that we follow. Thanks for all the introductions. If you can, please leave your camera on and stay focused. I realize we all have 400 emails in our inbox after maybe taking some time off. Use the raise hand function to speak and use the either regular raise hand or a thumbs up when we vote. And we'll call on you as you raise your hand. Thanks, Dean. All right. Any changes or additions for the agenda today? Dean has one.
Well, it's clarification. I had listed a couple of items as possible action or endorsement items. I was talking with Catherine earlier. The point of the agenda items is really to get feedback on them as the CWSP is planning to go ahead as much as possible. This is really a feedback session. If people are wholly opposed to the prioritization system and our thoughts on the solicitation, then we would like to know that. But it's not so much seeking the CWSP's approval, rather the WISC approval, as we want to hear people's reactions to the materials that were in the pack. Just a clarification, not a change.
Thanks, Dean. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns on the agenda?
Dean, are you saying that there's no vote required ultimately on this, or not today, or?
Dean, you are muted. Yep.
Yeah, sorry. What I would say is that after speaking with Catherine, it's not that we are needing the council's approval, but the way I think of it is that an endorsement would certainly be welcome. But it isn't necessary. If we left here without a vote, I wouldn't be disappointed in light of what Catherine had said.
And I just want to let Jim, if you'd like to introduce yourself, feel free. You think you muted yourself instead of unmuting yourself.
Sorry, Jim Pease, formerly Vermont DEC Water Infrastructure Division, but I'm retired, but I'm still involved in some ways with various projects.
Sounds good. Thanks for joining us. All right, so following that discussion of the agenda, do I hear a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Lindsay. Any seconds?
Second.
Thank you, Beth. Any abstaining? Seeing none. All in favor, please raise your hand in real life or on Zoom. I see Kent, Dan, Lindsay, Sarah, Beth, Mary, and Lauren. All right. Moving on. Meeting minutes from our last meeting, which was in beginning of this November. Yes, it's been so long, you guys. Any comments, questions, or edits? I believe I didn't see anyone reviewing, but if anyone else. And thank you, Jaya, for doing the voting members not present on this one and moving forward. That's very helpful. Thanks for the suggestion, Kent. All right. Seeing no comments. Yeah, I guess if you want to scroll a little bit further down, that'd be great. This one was a longer set of minutes, so if people didn't have a chance to read it, please do. That's right, Alaire wasn't coming today and Tucker couldn't come because he's having a second child today. That's right. Guess I won't be seeing Allie in the office very much later soon.
This is Lindsay. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Thank you, Lindsay. Wait a second. Thank you, Kent. Anyone abstaining? I believe Abraham, you'll have to abstain because you are not present. Okay. And all those in favor? I see Dan, Beth, Kent, Lindsay, Sarah, Barry, and Lauren. Wonderful. Thank you all. Motion passes. Now there's a period for any public comment not related to items on the agenda. Anyone have? All right, seeing none, we shall keep moving along. Seating of any new representatives or alternates, if required. Dean, I don't know where we are with this.
Yes, so in the meeting, in the time since the last meeting, Dave has stepped forward or been self-identified or agreed, or however we want to put it, as the alternate. So the information would be updated to reflect him unless there's any further change. But since the bylaws indicate that there's this seating process, we would just take care of that by having him seated.
Wonderful. So I guess he is seated.
Yeah,
And
I think when the initial seating of alternates took place, there might have been a motion. I'm not certain. It wouldn't hurt to have a motion, but it could be by acclamation as well.
I feel like we voted on alternates, but not on voting members.
And Dave would be an alternate because he is, the two municipal reps are Sarah and Dan.
Okay.
Emily was an alternate.
So, would anyone like to make a motion to seat Dave Allerton? Kent, I see your hand up. I assume that's the motion.
I so move.
Wonderful. A second. Sarah Downs, thank you very much. Any abstentions? Seeing none. All those in favor, please raise your hand. So I've got Dan, Beth, Lindsay, Sarah, Kent, Barry, and Lauren. Welcome to the team, Dave. And I'm just picking up on that Dean has been calling you Dave, not David, so I'm sticking with Dave. Let me know if we should go with David. Okay, I saw a shrug. Great. All right, Dean, have at it.
Well, thank you. And I just was checking the comment and I see it was a thanks. So the agenda has some meaty items on it this time. We're going to be starting with a discussion of some DEC documents that are very important and that affect the work of the council and of the CWSP. This is going to be a little bit of me blah blahing. Hopefully I can keep it to a minimum. Materials were included in your packet. I hope people had a chance to at least glance at it and perhaps formulated some questions. But if not, we'll just kind of make our way through. But I'm going to start with the CWSP funding policy, which just as a reminder to folks, DEC has many different levels and types of policy documents. Plans and policies and different documents go through different approval processes. They have had the CWSP division of DEC has had a funding policy in place for at least a few years now. Until recently, the last one that had been adopted was for fiscal year 21. We now have a funding policy that was adopted for fiscal year 23. But the reason why it warrants discussion is because it sets a lot of the requirements that affect the work that we do. They determine what projects are eligible for funding and what different requirements that go along with the funding of those projects. As you can see here on the screen, or I hope you can see here, this is the table of contents page. It's got a background section, it's got a policy section, and then a bunch of appendices. I've just highlighted a couple of them because I think we could end up spending more time talking about them than the others. One is the section on determining eligibility, and the appendix that I have highlighted is the one that's known as the project screening form. The CWIP policy has in it a series of objectives. You can see those here, but this document is described by DEC as a communications tool or communications document. So they really are using it as a vehicle for educating people basically about what they do and what's required. But the specific objectives that they set out are to ensure that the funds are used as intended by statute and as intended by the Clean Water Board. The Clean Water Board plays a very significant role in proposing the budget for water quality work. I've highlighted the second objective, which is to ensure that projects result in necessary deliverables for tracking and reporting. So as many of you know, if not all of you know, we're doing this work to, amongst other things, achieve phosphorus reductions that show progress towards meeting the Lake Champlain total maximum daily load, the TMDL. So we're spending money on projects to reduce phosphorus. Something that we need to do is track that progress, both in terms of the amount of phosphorus that's being removed by the projects, but also in terms of the costs that go along with meeting those targets. So there's a lot of tracking. And so it's one of the policy's explicit objectives is to ensure that the projects that get funded have the deliverables that we need in order to track projects. The other box that I have is for the fourth policy objective, and it's to minimize investments in infeasible and or low priority projects. And I think this is an objective that we will see come through in requirements having to do with project screening. Long story short, DECs and the CWIP folks are trying to direct funds towards projects that are actually feasible, not infeasible, and that we determine feasibility as soon as we can and get those projects developed and done, rather than investing money in projects that perhaps should have been set aside at the earlier stages. And then also the last policy objective is really to just make a link between this document and other DEC policies. But again, I'm highlighting objectives having to do with tracking deliverables, or making sure that the deliverables that DEC expects to be done for different types of projects are actually done, and that we invest our money wisely and we invest in projects that are feasible rather than not feasible. We don't want to spend money developing a project that ends up having to be abandoned. The next thing I'm going to touch on are the eligibility criteria. Now, just as a reminder, the CWIP portion of DEC has multiple programs in it. The CWSP, Clean Water Service Provider, and WIC World is just one piece, but it's an important piece of it. But the point I'm going to make is that the criteria that are in this document apply across all programs. So there may be certain situations, and we will expose them, where things apply specifically to the formula funds. The formula funds is another phrase that I will use for the CWSP dollars. And other times there will be requirements that don't apply to us. So one example has to do with tracking of match requirements, because in our world, there are not match requirements. We can do projects in the formula fund and CWSP world, WIC world, without formula funds. But the criteria are, as they are shown on the screen, there are 4 objectives that deal with water quality in different facets. A project must meet an eligible type. So you can't fund a project that isn't one of the eligible types, or it can't be used for things that are ineligible activities. And an example of an ineligible activity is just straight out invasives removal. It could end up in some way funding invasives removal as it being incidental to doing a project, but we could not process an application that is for just simply invasives removal. So it's got to be an eligible type or not ineligible. A project, in order to be working through this process, must have an identification number in the watershed project database. We have talked about this in the past, and I think we've done a little bit of training to expose people to the project database and how new projects get in the database. The fourth criterion is one that has to do with the permittability. Can a project idea that's being advanced get the environmental permits that it will need to get? And we will talk about this more, but it's something that is related to this emphasis that is in number 4 here as far as the objectives. If we don't determine the permittability early on, then we could end up in a situation again where we've invested in a project that we learn will not receive the permits that it needs to, or wouldn't be able to receive them without significant redesign. So eligibility criteria, an important one. Is it permittable? And then another one that I've highlighted is the demonstration of landowner commitment and demonstration of commitment to the operations and maintenance that's necessary. Sometimes these things will be connected, sometimes they will be separate. In other words, there will need to be an indication that a landowner supports a project and will allow it and will allow it to be maintained, but the obligation for operating and maintaining will be held by someone else. But just as with, we want to make sure that the project is going to get the permits that it needs, we want to invest only in projects where, and DEC through this policy is trying to direct us so that we invest in projects where there's a commitment on the part of the landowner and that we determine that early in the game. There are some more specific benchmarks, but it's one worth highlighting. There are a couple that, I'm just going to gloss over, having to do with funding and reasonable budgets. These are kind of things that I think most people understand. Whenever you're using grant funds, you don't use the grant funds to pay for exorbitant budgets and things like that, or ineligible things. No one's likely to take this funding and use it for trips to go on vacation. The last box I highlighted, though, is just this, gets back to this idea of this policy affects different programs, and those different programs have idiosyncrasies. An idiosyncrasy of the CWSP funding, or the formula funding, like I said, is that it is for non-regulatory projects. These are the projects that are not required because someone must get a stormwater permit, or they're not required because it's an agricultural situation and it is something that's required to meet the RAP. So these are the criteria. Maybe I'll just stop and take a moment to see if there are any questions on things so far. And if so, I'll answer them. And if not, I'll just keep plowing ahead. I see no hands. Oh, I see Ken.
Sorry, I just had to jump in. In regards to point 4, a lot of, it seems like when I have discussions with the tactical basin planner to procure the watershed project number, that we have discussions about permits and the availability, or what is the likelihood, which permits will be necessary. And I can just, from my past experience, this can be a real time delay to actually go through that whole permitting process. So are you suggesting that this permitting process needs to start even before we start locating these projects, or how does this fit in? Because it's seemed to work pretty well in the past that I get that information from the planner and then we proceed on.
Well, Ken, I would answer that by saying we're using money provided by DEC through the CWIP program, and the CWIP program is saying that there are certain requirements that go along with using their money. And we will be talking about the project screening form in a bit, but the environmental requirements, what we need to know about a project environmentally, the vehicle for determining that, it's as a result of the CWIP policy, we're being told that the vehicle for determining that is the screening form. The screening form has a bunch of different sections, but a big part of it is related to natural resource review or natural and cultural resource review. The policy and the form basically says there are there are, I think, something like 6 criteria in the screening form. And it says if it's a project that is seeking money for design, then you basically have to address all of these criteria. If you were seeking money for something that was investigation or assessment, before you know enough, the whole point of it is to determine natural resource impacts. Well, you don't have to complete that because that's the purpose of the work that you do. But what I'm sensing is that DEC is becoming more demanding in a sense. Yeah, they're becoming more demanding. They are requiring more information about resources earlier. And like I say, we'll get this fleshed out, or it becomes more clear when we look at the form. But if you are seeking funds for a 30%, a preliminary design, what I understand according to the CWIP policy is that the application for those funds needs to have a completed screening form. And so to fill out the screening form, you have to show that you have done a lot of environmental work. And it's going to mean, I think, questions about when the environmental work is done. It's going to shift to earlier stages to the extent that people might have used early preliminary design as a way of getting the resource work done. I'm reading the CWIP policy is saying is that that needs to happen before you ask for a chunk of money to do a design. We need to know whether or not it's a real project. And the way that we know it's a real project is if it's going to be permittable. And the way that we know it's permittable is if you can complete the environmental or natural resource section of the screening form. And maybe it'll be enough, Ken, to just say if you can hold on until we look at the form, because we'll do that in just a couple of minutes.
All right, fair enough.
I just want to briefly note that Karen Bates is also here, our watershed planner, if she wants to hop in. Karen, I'm not sure if you do or not, but figured I'd welcome you.
Yeah, I can't say that I have seen the most recent, but from conversations, it may be that if you've been in contact with the program that provides the permit, and the program says that this is permittable, that might be enough. That you don't actually have to have the permit in hand, or if the permit is in process.
Yeah, I should just follow that up if I can. This is not equated to having permits. It's to be able to say that you understand what the permits are and that the outcome of getting the permit is foreseeable. So if you have talked with the resource agency, if you've talked with the relevant resource regulators and you have the documentation that they say, yes, this is not a project that's raising flags, then you can fill out that section of the screening form in a way that will allow you to say, yes, I can move forward. But again, we'll get to brass tacks in just a minute. So I wanted to highlight, a couple of things, to recap some things. We've talked about this before, but we need to have ID numbers. Well, we also need to have ID numbers, not just once. We have to get ID numbers as projects progress. So as projects go through stages, they will need to get an updated number. So that's something to keep in mind. According to the policy, eligibility hinges on reasonably considered permittable by all applicable A&R permitting programs, and/or if the project proposal demonstrates how permitting staff feedback So if you can address this, Kent, or if an applicant can address this, then they're not going to be held back. But if they can't demonstrate this, then it would be a problem. They need to include the screening form. That's how you show it. Investigative work, the early stage work, there are 8. So basically you get to put off the permittability and land ownership, landowner commitment questions until later, but you can't ignore them, of course. Anytime someone is applying and is hoping to get these funds, they have to say that they will adhere to the funding policy and DE terms. They are, if you get a contract, you're doing a very narrowly defined scope of work, but if you're getting a grant, it's less narrowly defined. Eligible costs, this is something that gets to this question of how do partner organizations support, how do they have the capacity to do all this work? Because one of the things that this policy says is that the costs that are eligible are those associated with individual projects. So again, a project is the vehicle for the funding. And so it doesn't, there's nothing in the policy that I see as providing a clear path. How do partner organizations deal with the capacity question? Maybe the answer's in there somewhere, but it's not like it's spelled out clearly and then it's highlighted. The last thing I wanted to just mention again is that historic preservation review gets attention in this policy, or cultural resource. I call it historic preservation, but it's really cultural resource. It gets attention to a degree that the previous policy did not give it. So it's something that may seem new to people. There are 3 categories of projects. One category is exempt, one is conditionally exempt, and then the third one has to do with the projects that require review. I'm not prepared to get into that in great detail, but I just want to make sure people understand cultural resources could come into play. And certain projects are assumed, like tree planting projects, they're assumed to be exempt, but others are conditionally exempt. You need to do some documentation, and others will not be exempt. If that's okay, there are a couple of things I just wanted to just suggest, and maybe this is an open forum section. One person is responsible providing the ID numbers, and that would be the basin planner. I will say, not to put Karen on the spot, I know that some of my colleagues and I myself have wondered whether or not having one person be the person who allows the project into the database could represent a bottleneck. And maybe there are some ways that successive stages of projects wouldn't need to be approved by just one person. And then I've also heard concerns raised about the screening form and how much information needs to be developed prior to or as part of an application rather than as part of the project. But at this point, I would just turn things back over to you, Lauren, and maybe facilitate and hear what people say about what I've shared so far.
Happy to. Thoughts from folks? Yeah, Jim.
I would just clarify what Dean said about yes, tree planting, I believe is exempt, but any kind of soil stabilization process where you're actually moving soil would not be exempt. So it's kind of a fine line in a way, but.
Noted. Thank you. Yeah, Dean.
Yeah, just to follow up there, I know that in my marked up version of the policy, there's the use of the phrase land disturbance, but I haven't found it defined anywhere. But yes, Jim makes a good point there. And my point is the larger one, and that is cultural resources will need to get attention that they haven't gotten in the past. Some types of projects will be exempt, I guess, by category. So if it's this type of project, it will be exempt. But there are certain things that if you do them will require review.
Wonderful. Other folks. Kent.
Okay, I won't be shy. On the first point, I have always been very pleased with the basin planner's response to our requests. A lot of times she goes to the site before I can even arrange time to go with her. And I'm just, but I do feel that she's carrying a big geographical area. And so I don't want to undercut if there is any way to, if there's a reason to distribute those responsibilities. I don't want my comment to have any weight one way or another, but I just have been very pleased with the past performance, and I would not rate it as a bottleneck. I think a lot of the discussions that are in the screening process are ones that she and I have as we are coming up with these numbers. I think the part that the issue I would bring up is, as I mentioned before, is the permitting process. And yes, we can go through it and screen it and have a really good conversation about what each project's need is. But if we have a need and we need to get someone out there, I'm concerned that there's enough staff to come out and get this done in a timely procedure. So if I was going to identify a bottleneck, that's one that I would add to the list. The screening, as I said before, the screening form is part of the application process. I feel that just good communication with the basin planner is really has been the backbone, or has been the key to getting good projects in here. And I'm quite satisfied with the way that's going. But if you are expecting a real influx, then it's probably something that should be looked at. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Kent. Thoughts from others? All right. I will similarly express that concern of the availability of the A&R resource staff and the requirements on them to respond to us in a timely manner. I'll also add, I think, I know in the past, a lot of the project development grants, at least that have come through NRCC, are like a set amount of money. They aren't, you can't really budget your own. And so it sounds like project development is going to need a lot more funding to go through these screening tools now. So hopefully we can keep those budgets flexible, as they take a lot of time to fill out. Tom.
Yeah, maybe just to follow on a little bit with what Kent sent and also what you sent. We actually don't know if it's a burden yet or not. I mean, if we have projects, a lot of people wanting to propose projects and they're willing to go through the screening process and some of its nuances. I mean, I don't think we know that answer yet. My gut says it might be a burden, and we might not be getting, enough projects to fill our goal. I can't remember what the number is, 1.5 million or something like that. But if we're not seeing that, this could be one of the reasons, because you have to put so much work into a proposal to submit. So somehow we're just going to have to monitor that if we're not getting proposals because of this screening process.
Thanks, Tom. I'll also add too, I think it'd be a good idea in the future. Like I filled out the screening form for a couple projects in the past, but I don't actually know what the end permit would have looked like. And so maybe some like familiarity with some of the more obscure permits that one might be considered, like might need to fill out for a project. That might be an interesting piece for a future discussion. Lindsay.
Sort of spurring off of that, and I think we've talked about this in the past, or at least I've talked with some of the partners on the call, making resources available, specifically those cultural resource folks if people haven't had experience with having to do the ARC surveys, then it would be good to just say, these are the groups that we know that do this, and this is a range of cost, something like that, so that we can effectively expect to do those.
Thanks, Lindsay. Karen.
So yeah, I like Lindsay's idea that there's some resources put out there to help train people or allow them to understand what it requires to get through the permitting process. The one thing that I can say just based on past experiences, this isn't it's not a deviation, a huge deviation from what we've done in the past. So the only time it becomes a bottleneck, from what I understand is what will happen in the future as well, is when the applicant doesn't have the training or education to know when to get in touch with the program, and also might identify a project that other people who have experience knows it's just never going to be permitted. To keep away from wetlands. Find another spot, unless it's a restoration. So maybe what happens is this: we ask for some training here.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Tom, is your hand still up or newly up?
I guess I have to put it down. Sorry about that.
No worries. And then I'll just add in too, I think because of these many hoops, it's an even stronger argument for us to have some form of rolling application periods, so that if you get through project development, you finally get all of your permits, you can then go smoothly and quickly into an application so that you don't get stuck in a project development phase for a year. When really you just needed 3 more emails type of thing. That's how I'll wrap that up. Any further comments at this time? I know we're going to talk some more about it. All right, seeing none, I'll hand it back over to you, Dean.
Okay, thanks. So about the screening form, it's a form that in a different format or earlier iteration has been around. It's a fillable PDF file, so it's something that you can open up in Adobe or a similar software program and fill out. It's got lists. It's somewhat automated, in other words, so it has features in it that are meant to make it easier for people to use. And so that's good news. It's something that will be updated over time, and I know that there are references in the different DEC materials to making sure you're using the updated or current version of the form. And as I said, it has some things in it that earlier forms didn't have. The form itself says when it should be completed, and it says it should be completed for all projects seeking funding for 30% design or more, or implementation work. Now, I'm someone who, as a result of the work that he has done, I have done, I attach a certain meaning to the word should, and that is non-mandatory. However, it's not how I see this as being meant by DEC. I don't think that DEC, because it uses the word should, that it is legally something that is non-mandatory. I believe that it's more like a common sense rather than legal meaning of the word, and that is they say that you should use it. It's kind of like a parent telling the child, you should do this. There isn't really much questioning whether or not it needs to be done. And I think there are going to be some situations when DEC may say it's a circumstance that you don't need to use the form, but even though the word is should, I think that we need to generally interpret it as a shall, and maybe someone will challenge me on this, but if it's if I'm wrong, I'll be happy to adjust. I think though that even though I'm saying it should be read as a shall, that we do it there could be these exceptions and we'll have to learn more. I didn't say what the timetable is for the CWIP policy. The CWIP policy was signed. It's in effect, as I understand it. There is a comment period that I think runs through the end of the month, and there will be a public comment session. There's a question and answer document. I think basically the way that we look at this is that it's not likely to change, but the way that it should be interpreted, we will be told how it should be interpreted through this question and answers document. Anyway, we will learn more within a month's time. So in addition to the form being completed for all projects.
Can I pause you really quick? Jim has his hand up.
Yep, sorry.
I just wondering, Dean, being a former QUIP employee, but I don't understand the 30%. When you say 30% plus design, does that mean anything greater than 30%, or does that mean 30%? Because my understanding was assessments, like we were talking about earlier, investigations could lead to a 30% design, but wouldn't require, at least the application for funding for that project wouldn't require, for the investigative or assessment work, wouldn't require you filling out this screening form.
Right. So I should read the second and third bullets together, I guess. My intention with this was to say that if it's 30%, 100%, I learned some things about the inner workings of DEC I didn't know before, because they have actually more categories of design levels than I ever knew they had. They have a 10%, they have a 30%, they have a 60%, they have a 9%. It's more like VTrans than I ever realized. But the ones that we hear about are 30% and 100%. That's mostly what we hear about. And my intention with the second bullet is that I understand that if you're seeking funds for a 30% design, you're coming in and I want to do a 30% design, that will need the form. If you're doing something that is for assessment or development, then you are encouraged, and we in fact as a QUISP would like to see the form used, but you only have to do a subset of the criteria. In other words, you don't have to provide the information on the landowner. You don't have to provide the information on the resources. But what I understand the policy to desire is that if you are seeking funds for 30% or for 100%, you will have completed the form and you will have used all of the sections of the form.
Okay.
If you are only seeking funds for development, then you do not have to complete all sections of the form. You do not have the burden of the natural resource assessment. Is that jiving with what you understood, Jim?
Well, I haven't been in touch with the folks, so this is a slight change, but yeah, I mean, I understand it. It's not quite what we did before, but it makes sense.
Okay. Okay. So as I said, it's the form is meant to be a tool, and I'm sure that whoever is responsible for it believes with reason that it's helpful. And I too think it's helpful, but it's also something that's going to mean more work, particularly in situations where people haven't done certain investigations that they will have to do before they get the funding that they need. The third bullet, like I say, it says it's permissive. It may be applied to projects that are looking for the earlier stage work, but it is much more limited. And I foresee us as a QUISP encouraging the use of the form, but just you get to say NA to those more demanding parts of it. Now, the screening form has a series of steps. Step one is, I believe, you have to show that it meets one of the objectives of, it's a list of objectives. You have to show that you meet one of them. Step two is there are eligible types And you have to basically, you can't get funding for a project unless it's one of the list of project types. But when you choose a project type that's on the list, you also get along with that milestones and deliverables. And some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this, but I'm just going to emphasize it, that you choose a project type. And if you look in the CWSP policy, you see associated with that project type a column, and it's got standards and milestones and deliverables. And these are things that you are basically setting yourself up to have to do if you choose that particular type. So just weigh the significance of choosing your project type. Step 3, it's where you get your watershed database number. We'll get to that. Step 4, it's the resource screening. Step 5, landowner. They've lumped together a bunch of things: landowner support, operations, maintenance, budget, and the specific program requirements. And then step 6 is related to a project on any on an agricultural setting. Anyway, this is the overview. These are the things that we're going to see when I pull up the form itself, which I hope to do momentarily. Oops. All right, folks. Okay, so the project screening form is an appendix of the CWSP policy, as I said. Step 1 is, as I mentioned, you have to indicate that your project would meet one of a series of 4 objectives. And if you don't meet one of those objectives, then it's not eligible. I think this is going to be an easy thing for people to deal with. So, and then if it's not one of those, you're supposed to fill out, but I think in most cases, it will be easy for people. So step 1 is a pretty easy step. Step 2 is, as you can see here, for project types. So this, unfortunately, is very small, and maybe there's a way that this can be. It's a list of projects. So if you are doing buffer planting, you're choosing buffer planting. But basically, you go through the list to choose your project, and then you continue on. Okay. And then you, in addition to choosing the type, you say, is the project type eligible for funding that you're applying for? Yes or no? Does it meet the definitions and minimum standards? And there's a specific table for that. So this is the stuff that this form is asking you to complete whenever you are moving forward with the project. And I agree, the idea of creating specific training for this makes a lot of sense, and that's not the purpose of this presentation. It's better to leave the specific training to the people that would be able to answer your question specifically. But we want you to understand this because of its role in affecting your applications for funding, which we hope to happen soon. Is it listed as ineligible? As I mentioned, there are specific things like invasives removal that are not eligible. So this is the form. I could think of ways that it might be friendlier or easier to use or with more helpful hints or things like that. we haven't taken it upon ourselves to make our own version because, as we understand it, this is the version that you're supposed to use, and so we haven't pursued that. Watershed project database. It asks you to put the number in, put the name in. This is pretty basic stuff. And here we get to step 4. And this is where I think the rubber meets the road for people that are contemplating applications that would like to get designs for projects where it's going to be a bit of a challenge to answer all of these questions. As Karen was saying, and I think Kent was alluding, you know, there's a lot of work with agency staff to do this. They do, you identify which A&R permitting program should be contact them, get the review by the staff, and then get them to tell you what their concerns are, and then you create a response that addresses any of those concerns. That's really the guts of it. Again, purpose of this is not to train people the use of the form, it's to understand its main pieces and have you know that if we're moving forward with a grant round, this is something that we're understanding from the CWSP policy you will be expected to use. They've bolded this. Proponents should clarify they are seeking permitting staff input on permitting needs. You're not getting the permit. You're getting them to say where things are headed, basically. And then there's a table that has to do with establishing if there's any Act 250 jurisdiction, lake and shoreland permit jurisdiction that happens within 250 feet, generally speaking. And who so if you're within 250 feet, you've got to go down that road. If it's within a river corridor or 100 feet of a corridor, you've got to deal with these issues. Wetlands, as it's been mentioned, wetlands are a challenging area when it comes to developing projects. So use the wetland screening tool. So this form passes you off to other tools that you're supposed to use to be able to fill this out. And you know, does your project involve land that is in or near any of the following? And so they cast the net. This form casts the net pretty broadly. It's not just looking at one simple map. And then if you answered yes or not sure to these, you have to get in touch with the wetlands ecologist. So there's the wetland path that you have to take. There's the fish and wildlife path that you have to take that, you know, are you possibly going to affect bat habitat and so forth, natural communities, stormwater, solid waste. Anyway, this is an exhaustive list. And maybe I'll just stop and take a breather to see what questions people have about this portion of it. But I think this is like I said, where the rubber meets the road.
Thanks, Dean. Thoughts from folks? I'll say, yeah, go ahead, Jim.
I guess I would just clarify that maybe this is obvious, but at the point of the permitting process, I'm not defending it in any way, but is to avoid conflicts. So when a project isn't next to a stream, it's obviously going to potentially have a conflict, but a project that's far away or in a clearly, you know, all I'm saying, I guess, is that avoiding conflict is the purpose of the process. And you can sort of tell when you do your investigative work whether you have that real potential for a conflict.
Thanks, Jim. One of my biggest concerns is the links in the document and how often DEC links break, and just making sure that they don't, or that we notify them soon if we notice that the links are broken. And in my perfect world, which I know is not real, and I feel like someone had mentioned this to me at one point, was that we would actually just like submit all this information to ideally one person at DEC, and they would pass it around internally, as opposed to us trying to figure out exactly who, what, where, get a response, bug them about a response, bug them about a response, and all these different things. So I'll just say, in my perfect world, I would just like make a map and send it to DEC and let the permitting people tell me which permits I might need. But that's probably not how this is going to work. But I'll shout it to the heavens and see if one day you can get it too. Thoughts from, yeah, Dean.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, that I had not heard that idea, or if I had heard it, I had forgotten it. But if the goal is to get projects done that will help reduce phosphorus going into the lake, it seems like it would be a good way to structure things. It's
right. Yeah, especially with just our current employment atmosphere and turnover, and how often are they going to keep those maps of who serves what region updated? Anywho, I digress. Other folks. Yeah, Sarah.
As a newbie coming in and never having done a grant for water quality, and we're trying to encourage more people to clean up the rivers and the lakes, I think this is gonna make fewer people. It's very concerning to me, the hoops, and anytime you're dealing, no offense to those of you who are working them up here, but anytime I've had to work with people, it is like moving a glacier that, you know, we're trying to have some expediency here, and I really feel like we're going to be bottlenecking everything. I don't know what the answer is, but you know, when I spent time reading this, I thought, oh my gosh, if I was a new person coming in who didn't have the expertise, I really wouldn't even know where to start.
Great point. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, Dean.
Perhaps time to move on if there aren't more comments, because we do have a little bit more ground to cover. Karen.
Is it Karen?
I just want to make sure that people don't feel too dismayed by all this information. I think, you know, the reality of it is that anybody applying for a project is going to be somebody who can be a project manager, who knows, has some background. I don't think it's ever been expected that you could have a group that didn't have that experience apply for these projects. I think that they support them, but I think that we are expecting there will be the experienced group that applies for them, or that there will be opportunities for training, so that if a group does want to, has a consistent project manager who can be trained, that we can train them then, and they can then step into this role of project implementer, because it takes time and energy, and where I think that the focus is to make sure that they get paid enough so that whatever organization is going to support a project manager can continue to do it on a long term, and not have turnover or depend on a volunteer to do it. So that would be my answer to then anybody's skepticism that, you know, how are we going to find people to implement the projects if it's this complicated?
Thanks, Karen. All right, Dean, on to the next.
Sure, and winding up here, step 5 is the landowner section that I mentioned earlier. There will need to be some indication that the landowner is committed to the project. That will extend, as I said earlier, to allowing the required operations and maintenance to go forward. Step 6 is a step that has to do with basically determining if you've done the right things and the project involves agricultural property. I think in vast majority of cases, I think we will have relatively few projects that invoke this, but we basically will need you to say, no, it doesn't have this, and then you can keep going and consider the form completed. So if you say it's no, not on a jurisdictional farm, you get to say no, and then you've completed that. So
I just
that's
say, Dean, I actually think we're going to get a lot of projects on jurisdictional farms, but non-farm projects, if that makes sense.
okay. Well, I meant to say that I thought that we won't get projects where you will answer yes to having to use the Agency of Food and Markets screening form. I think that it will be things that are going to be doable with limited review.
Great.
But I look forward to learning what the projects are going to be, because I don't know what people have in mind. So this will be a chance for me to move back. So long story short, we have this form, people are supposed to use it. It's supposed to be, it is something, therefore, we will incorporate into the application process. So when people apply, they will attach a copy of the form. We will have it. It's part of the documentation, and we will just move forward. But moving on, presentation of draft prioritization system. This is something that I mentioned in the cover memo. We've come up with a system. I had indicated that encouraged to take action after talking with Catherine, who had been out when I put the package together. It's really less looking for action than looking for feedback. But as I said, an endorsement would be appreciated. I think that our intention is to keep rolling and get us set up so that we could issue a call for projects as soon as possible. We have created what we are calling a complete system. We are not doing what some councils have done or some QUISPs have done to say to their councils, here, tell us how many points you would give for a specific thing, and then they built up. We've got a system that we're going to show you, and we think, give us feedback, we can tweak it, but we're hoping that we don't spend an inordinate amount of time discussing it. We would like to get something in place, and that will facilitate opening up the application process. We can make changes to it if it doesn't work for us, but we don't want it to hold things up. We think it's workable, and we think it's consistent with rule, and we think that it can work, and it will allow things to go ahead, like I said. We've talked about this before. The criteria for project prioritization that are set forward in rule have to do with pollution reduction, cost effectiveness of that reduction, design life, the cost of operation and maintenance of projects, conformance with the basin plan, and co-benefits. We've talked about each of these, so I won't belabor it. These are color coded, or they're colored this way for a reason, because they help people understand what we're proposing as a model. We're starting from this idea that it'll be 100 points. We are having, as much as we can, a simple system. Pollution reduction, we're proposing be about 30 points. Cost effectiveness, which is going to factor in the cost and the amount of pollution reduction. We're setting initially at about the same, but a little bit less, 27. Design life, 15. Cost of operation and maintenance, because the cost of operating and maintaining systems is a soft area as far as data, we're proposing that it be either zeroed out initially, or it's a very low number, because the numbers just aren't going to be that strong. And we're worried about having a system where very soft numbers are used and they have a very big impact. This is one of the concerns that we have had with a system that DEC has developed, that some uncertain numbers are used in combination, multiplying the uncertainty, and we just want to keep it simpler. So cost of operation and maintenance, we recognize it's going to be required, but we're going to set the number very low, at least to start. Conformance of the basin plan, we're suggesting it be given more weight than one of the models at DEC, but it's going to be basically 10 points. Co-benefits, some of the other BWQs have been looking at scores in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 points. For now, we are putting this forward with 18 points, and it's basically going to be simple to calculate as we have shown it. I wanted people to understand we not only have the system, but we've plugged numbers into that system to see what it actually does. And this is a somewhat overwhelming table. I can appreciate that. But I wanted people to know that using a list of projects that came from a DEC prioritization model, we've got a stormwater project, we've got a riparian buffer project, we've got a lakeshore project, we've got a river corridor project, we've got a conservation easement project, a range of projects that have data for phosphorus reduction and costs that we would use to calculate the cost effectiveness. So how many kilograms per dollar, and it's a very small number, it's a very percentage of a kilogram, will a project represent? Design life, that's something that is fairly well established. We're also saying that we think that there needs to be an adjustment. A project with that's permanent, it does not have an infinite, it isn't infinitely better than a project with a 1-year lifetime. So we're putting a cap basically on the life, and we're saying that the cap for the life would be 40. So it's anyway, it's a kind of a small technical thing, but we, generally speaking, people will be plugging in the number of years that a project will last. Understand, everybody, and I know that you do, that a project that is only a 10-year project is going to have to be renewed or replaced in another 10 years if its life has run its course. The DEC model has a somewhat sophisticated way to address this. We think that we would like to keep it simple for now, and we will compare projects basically straightforwardly on how long their life, design life is, and the longer it is, the better it will be. We can do, when data is available, we can enter in the dollars per kilogram for operation and maintenance. Like I said, for now, we don't think that that data is really strong enough to use consistently. So we've zeroed this out. And then conformance with the basin plan, we're keeping it simple. We're actually, we think that it's being kept simple. A project would either get 10 points if it's a project that you can say, hey, it's on page 17 of the basin plan. It's in the table right there. Okay, it gets the maximum number of points. Or if it's not in the plan in an explicit way, but you can say, hey, it's encompassed in some element of the plan, well, then you get 5 points. And if it's not in the plan at all, and I would hope that there are a few applications where that's the case, then it'll get 0 points. But generally speaking, project conformance with the basin plan, so either going to get 5 points or 10 points. And then finally, with co-benefits, we have talked in the past about a UVM study that has 6 categories. We've also talked about how, for the purposes of the initial application, we want it to be simple. And when a list is brought to the council for a final determination, those that are on the bubble, that are close to, if there's some that won't be funded, you can do a close examination of the co-benefits and get into much more detail about the co-benefits of those that are on the edge. But for now, you basically are asked the question, how many of the 6 areas does it address? Oh, 1, it gets a 1. 2, it gets a 2. 3, it gets a 3, and so on. It ends up, just because we're giving co-benefits 18 points out of the total, it's going to be whatever number you have times 3. So this is not the live spreadsheet. I can pull it up, but I wanted people to see the overview, and I can open up the spreadsheet in just a minute to compare our approach with the DEC approach. The DEC approach has 20, so we're relatively close in terms of the points on co-benefits. Basin plan, the DEC model only has 4. We're giving it more weight. Their approach to design life is to give extra points for beyond 15 years. So it's recognizing the value of longer life, but it's addressing it differently. 4 points out of the total are for the cost of maintenance. And like I said, for now, we're zeroing that out or keeping it a very, very low because we don't think those numbers are very strong. But perhaps most importantly is that DEC is giving 60 points, but it's a merged score that we just don't like as much as having separate scores for pollution reduction and for cost effectiveness. Before I open up the spreadsheet, I just wanted to compare the results when we have the scores of these projects in our system versus the DEC system. There's some consistency, except in the area of riparian buffer planting. The DEC model really boosts riparian buffer projects. So that's the difference is greatest there. Lakeshore are dealt with consistency. River corridor are somewhat consistency. There only is a difference of 1, but I just wanted to point out this is the area where the DEC model and the NRPC model vary the most. I'm going to just stop things for a second. So this is the spreadsheet itself. And the thing that I will just say before opening up for questions is that there are different ways. We've liked the idea of having a score from 0 to 100. We like the idea of people being able to say that 30 points of that 100 are for phosphorus reduction. We also have the reality that everyone who submits an application is supposed to use the DEC phosphorus calculator. So there's an absolute number of kilograms of phosphorus that our project is expected to provide. We can adjust that number, whatever it is, and basically scale it to a number between 1 and 30. So that's what we do. So if a project has a 20 kilogram reduction, then it's going to, and actually 21 is the highest. So of these projects that we're applying for, since it's the highest, it's going to be 30. So we just are adjusting these scores or the kilogram reductions and scaling them to between 1 and 30 because this area has a maximum of 30 points. We do the same thing for cost effectiveness. Again, we adjust the real numbers and put them on a scale between 1 and whatever the maximum number of points is going to be awarded. The design life, it's a little different. We're saying that if it's not a little different, it's a lot different. It's basically if the project has a life of more than 15 years, then it's going to get the maximum number of points. If it's between 10 and 15, it gets 10 points. And if it's less, it gets 5. And I had already talked about the basin plan, and I had already talked about the co-benefits. And then we can plug these numbers in after the applications are received. We can pull the numbers because of how we're processing the applications. And that's going to be what allows us as the CWSP to do the sorting and breaking things out and preparing a list for the council's consideration. I've gone on plenty there, so I'm going to stop and see what questions people have.
Thanks, Dean. Questions from folks? If not, I've got a list. Okay, Jim, go ahead.
I'm just a little scary that the cost of operation and maintenance is 0 because, I mean, and I'm only talking about stormwater projects, but there's such a range And the design life is often a function of the operation and maintenance of it, of those structures. So it's just a little frightening that, I mean, even if it can't be a specific number, I mean, as a general rule, it could be it could be very high maintenance requirements, very medium, or very low. And you could number it that way. It's just, Dean, as you know, I mean, some towns that have been building a lot of these structures over the years, over the last 10 or 20 years, most of their cost is now most of their budget is being driven by operations and maintenance. It certainly makes a difference whether you're constructing a low maintenance project or series of projects versus a high maintenance project. That's all I'm saying. And it does depend on the resources the town has available. If it has equipment, that's one thing. If it doesn't have equipment, then it has to contract that out, and that's a higher cost. So it's just a little scary to me.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I should add, we are anticipating asking for the information as part of the application, and this is so we would have the information if by the time this is all going live, we conclude that we have to use the information, we can, because we are planning to ask for the information, but we're just feeling pretty uncomfortable with how consistent it is, or how reliable the numbers are. And even if we, I mean, I could say off the top of my head, okay, we're going to make some adjustments here. Co-benefits will be 15, and pollution reduction will be 27 as well. And so we'll say 6 points for the cost of operation and maintenance. I mean, we could make that kind of adjustment, and because we're intending to ask for the information, we could do it. But our inclination is to use that information in a limited way until we feel more confident in the data about what the costs will be, because I appreciate what you say about that. There's a lot of money being spent on the maintenance of the stormwater projects. We could factor it in, but then we could be kicking ourselves because the costs are even higher and we're not factoring it in enough. So, but it's a good point, and it's something that I'll take back to Catherine.
Well, yeah, and I do think also that column, that the cost of operation and maintenance directly impacts the design life. Again, just for stormwater projects, but you could double, triple, quadruple the design life if you did regular annual maintenance. But
yeah, we're starting from the premise that to do these projects and to comply, you will have to do the maintenance. There's no doing a project and not maintaining it. Someone will be signing a piece of paper that says, I am going to maintain this project according to the plan. So I hear you. We might get a project that can reset its life if they've done a good job maintaining it, but not maintaining it is not an option.
no, I understand.
So
It seems like you get more points if the design life are larger or higher.
Right.
Jim. Do one quick question on design life, then I'll see if anybody else has questions. Then I've got some more comments. I'm just curious as to why a riparian buffer only has a 15-year design life. Trees last longer than 15 years.
That number I pulled in from the spreadsheet. That's a good question. I had not made an adjustment. Those were numbers that I pulled from a DEC example that we were presented with, not as something we had to do, but if it was changed to 30, well, we can see what happens. Yeah. Or if it
Oh, 'cause
goes,
it's
It might be because of the length of the agreement.
okay. Do we think our operations and maintenance agreements are going to be 15 years?
Well, or the landowner, you know, if it's Fish and Wildlife or or somebody else, if there's an agreement to maintain it for a certain length of time, that would, you know, determine the length of the project.
Sure. Okay.
Legally, they wouldn't, you know, they wouldn't be required to keep it there.
yeah. If I may, Lauren, it is that the guidance or the instructions I've been hearing are that very few projects will have an easement requirement. The rest of them are going to have these agreements, and these agreements are going to have a lifespan. And if it's 15 years, then one of the concerns I've expressed is like, well, we've just potentially lost the project rather than being able to count on it forever. But that is the reason I'm quite confident.
Okay. Thoughts from other folks? If not, I'll rattle off my list. All right. I am concerned that with pollution reduction and then cost effectiveness of reduction, we're like double counting reductions because it's cost effectiveness is using reductions again. And just wanting to point that out that we might be saying the same thing twice in effect. I'm also nervous about this cost effectiveness in general and what number we're using for that cost effectiveness. Because if I'm going in at 30% design and I have to fill this out, I don't know what the cost for final design will be. I don't know what the cost for implementation will be, and I don't know what the cost for monitoring will be. And so if it's just cost effectiveness for my 30% design, sure, that's fine. But I think being able to project forward is hard, and therefore like cost effectiveness can only really be used at an implementation stage if you already have bids. Yeah, go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, we originally developed our prioritization system looking at the cost of the phase, but in the DEC view of things, we need to be considering the cost of the overall project. And I get where they're coming from, but it becomes very, very difficult. You get very speculative numbers. And so there's so we have asked, and you can see this in the total or in the spreadsheet, we want to know what the cost for the phase is, and we want to know what someone's best guess or estimate of the total so that we have both. This has been run using total, or could be run using either, but we understand DEC wants it to be based on the total. We could prioritize. One of the arguments that we've been making to DEC in our comments on the guidance document is that we feel as a CWSP or as a basin, as a region, we can develop a tool that we think works for us, and DEC's need for certain numbers shouldn't dictate how we prioritize. We can make sure that DEC has the numbers it needs, and that's its concern, that we can make sure that they have the numbers for both the cost of the phase and the cost of the total project, if that's what they need. But if we were to say that our prioritization, the cost effectiveness is only to be based, so here it's based on the total costs. But if there was a huge uproar that these numbers, like I was saying before, with the cost of O&M are too squishy, but the numbers for the phase are pretty solid, then we could consider our cost of effectiveness to be based only on the phase. But that would still mean that we could calculate a cost effectiveness on total. We just wouldn't be using it for our prioritization. Does that make sense?
Right, it would be an after the fact type of thing. Yeah. I guess too, like along with this cost effectiveness, even if it's, I guess it makes me hesitate to, if we're doing all project stages, like, does that start at project implementation? Because depending on the group doing it, or not implementation development, but depending on the group doing it, if they did an assessment and then they did a development and then they did 30% design and then they needed 60% design and then they needed 100% design, that's a huge administrative cost needed to get to implementation. So I guess I'm, for some reason, apparently landing at this point of like, cost shouldn't actually be in our prioritization at all. It should be, is it a good project? And then if we end up running out of money, that's a different discussion. But it feels like at this point, like cost effectiveness, we're not gonna be able to get to that in any meaningful way. And again, I think this should really only should be used at a, I guess if they're making us do all this permitting at 30% design, you really need to know what your project is at 30% design. And not wait to final design, but just like the exact footprint of something can change dramatically from 30% design to 100% design. And that really dramatically impacts your P reduction. And I'm hesitant. Yeah, okay. And then last thing I'll say, I guess I think, Dean, you and I had a little confusion in an email. The conformance of the basin plan, is it 10 points if it's in the actual implementation table, and then it's 5 points if it's in the rest of the plan, and 0 if it's not in the plan at all?
Yeah, essentially, although if there was a specific mention of a project or something could be characterized as such and it's not in the table, then it could still get the 10 points. The idea is that the clearest way of saying something gets 10 points is because it's in the implementation table.
Then I will reiterate, I don't love that. Basin plans are 5 years long and they don't really have all that many projects listed in them. They have like approaches and techniques and general areas, but we're the ones writing those plans. So if we learn something new in those 5 years, it's not going to be in the plan because we didn't know about it. But if the basin planner says, yes, that's a good idea, it's been designated as impaired last year, I think we should be able to have a workaround of that as well, of like approval from the basin planner that it'll be in the next basin plan or something. That's how I'll phrase that. I just want to get all the points for all the projects. And I don't want costs included because it isn't about the project some of the time. It's about those 12 design phases beforehand and which engineer you hire. Like that's, okay, I'm off pedestal.
Yeah, and just to clarify where I think we're coming from as the QUISP and QUISP staff is that we go back to the requirements as they're spelled out in rule, and we're pretty hung up on the specific areas that are identified in rule, and we're hung up on them because we understand that words mean something and that these specific areas are mentioned for a reason. They're not there not to be taken seriously. So we put together a system that has scores for pollution reduction and cost effectiveness. I get what you're saying. I could go into more of an argument about why I don't think it's a problem. But I get what you're saying. And the simplest response is, this is what the rule says. It says that we are to consider pollution reduction and the cost effectiveness of that reduction. And those are two discrete things. They're related. but they're two discrete things and they overlap, but that's what we built it around. Now, the DEC model just combines it all together and says, almost 2/3 of the point, 60%, it's all about cost effectiveness. They really want cost effectiveness to be driving this. But if the numbers are squishy, that's really undermining the value of having any kind of prioritization system at all. I feel personally pretty good about cost effectiveness when it's about a project type where we've got good estimating techniques and the dollars that are associated with it are likely to be valid, or at least on the right order of magnitude. Once we start talking about entire project costs, things go out the window. The utility of that criterion just drops like a stone. But I hear what you're saying. I think, if there was great hesitation about using cost effectiveness and prioritization, I'll take that back to Catherine and we can think about how that number might be lowered. But would you be comfortable if we found a way to make the cost effectiveness based on the phase? Would that reduce your concerns enough?
It would reduce my concerns enough. It wouldn't get rid of my concerns.
Ken has
It's
his
just-
hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Could I just offer that I'm thinking that as projects go through phases, that there's going to be variability in the score. And I assume we're going to be reevaluating or re-ranking them every time there's an amendment or we go to another phase. And having gone through a major amendment to a construction project I managed, where the cost went from $230,000 to $530,000 in a year and a half. I think that's what we're going to be faced with. And I'm assuming that we're going to be using this criterion at each phase and at each amendment. Is that how the scoring is going to be used?
If I may, Lauren. So applications will be scored for every round. So if you do a project, it's part of a round, and so this system will be used. So you're pointing out something that we need to address, and that is what happens when costs escalate. And we haven't prepared anything formal about this, but I think that where we could go is to say that there's a certain amount of increase that could be accompanied or accommodated without having to bring the project back. But beyond that, the project would need to come back and be rescored. So it's kind of like a community is in a grant, they get a grant for projects, the costs escalate, they will often go out and get another grant. Now, maybe that's what will happen with QUISP projects, but because we have pretty adequate funding for QUISP projects, the idea would be to come back and ask for more, and then it would be evaluated and the scores would be different because the costs are different. But I do think that for a modest increase in cost, we want to have a system that doesn't require someone to stop in their tracks. I just can't tell you what that amount would be over the original budget that we would say, okay. Now, granted, budgets should have contingencies, but I do know the situation that you're talking about where because of the global situation, the costs went through the roof. And maybe that will be rare enough where it does need to come back to the council and it would be scored using different numbers.
Great. Questions from other folks or follow up from Ken? All right. And don't get me wrong, thank you very much for drafting this, Dean. I'm very appreciative. It's just one of these, I understand there's a rule and ... Karen, what would you like? Karen, are you there?
Apologize. So
There you
with
go.
the, just wanted to add some ideas for the tactical basin plan. So if the implementation table are the strategies in plan, that's what the basin plan supports. Everything else is just narrative that supports what the, gives you a reason for why the implementation table includes those strategies. I would suggest as a possibility, another possibility is you could give the full amount of score if it's the strategy plus the priority area, town or basin, in the second column. The first column is usually the strategy, and then the second column is the areas that should be prioritized because we're assuming you'll get more phosphorus in those areas. So one could distinguish the different points based on that, those two. And as Lauren said, it's they're not specific projects, except maybe when we say generally stormwater master plans will be supported, the priority areas would be, you know, Sheffield, then that would be you could get 5 points if it's a strategy to develop a stormwater management plan. You could get another 5 points if it's for Sheffield.
Thank you, Karen. All right. Any further discussion on this at this time? Seeing none, you shall move on.
Okay, so we are hoping that we're edging closer to a project solicitation announcement. The Addison RPC has issued an announcement for the Otter and the Lewis Creek watersheds and Little Otter. I got an email last night from Dan Albrecht, and I believe that the Basin 5 application process is imminent. We're hoping that we can get our system set up and rolling pretty soon too. I wanted to give an overview. So we've done a draft announcement and application, and I'll walk people quickly through the application. It's a 3-page announcement. It's not like super detailed. We based it on what Addison has done. We know that we made some adjustments because of language in the CWSP policy, and we've heard that Addison has actually extended theirs and modified theirs because they have just done the same. We're planning to use an online application form. It's not going to be through Google Forms. It's going to be through this system called Smart Sheets that we use, which will allow us to link it with our project management and our accounting systems. And it hopefully, by making it an online application, just limit the number of times that people have to plug in numbers, but hopefully people will see it and look at it. And if we need to make adjustments, we will. We'll talk about timeline in a minute. I'm gonna just show you. This is a mock-up. Now I have in Lamoille, because at one point it wasn't clear to me whether or not these would be going out simultaneously, but we're not intending this. So I can strike in Lamoille. We would be doing separate announcements for each. We would have to figure out how close we are to this being ready in order to set the date. The thing I would say is that if we're meeting every 2 months, that it would be necessary to have the application deadline be at least 2 weeks before the meeting, because that would give a minimum of 1 week for processing of the applications and preparing a priority list, roughly to be available roughly 1 week ahead of the meeting. So that's in terms of schedule, but it's got a basic introduction. Again, we're just going to be doing this for the Missisquoi. It makes reference to the law, the rule. We would include the amount that's available for the year, which for the basin is going to be roughly 1.5. I'd be putting that number in specifically. We have reference to the specific projects. So projects must reduce phosphorus, they must benefit water quality, and they have to be consistent with the funding policy. So there are links to those. We talked about the eligible project types. That was in that DEC form. We just cut and pasted those. There are the eligible phases. These are just presented for people to be able to see, and the details are in the funding policy. We mentioned who the eligible entities are. The eligible entities are nonprofit watershed organizations, conservation districts, RPCs, other nonprofit organizations, municipalities. Ineligible are private citizens, for-profit businesses, etc. Just a summary about the evaluation process, that applications would be evaluated using whatever the final prioritization system is. We tell people they have to calculate the phosphorus reduction benefits using DEC's tool, and so on. The list would be presented to the council. The council will meet quarterly, and our intention is for rounds to happen quarterly. So I hear about ongoing basis, but if the council's meeting quarterly, when this is when we are in our normal mode, we've been meeting every other month, so somewhat more frequently. That's how often we think things would be processed. We can receive an application, but it wouldn't happen. Nothing would happen unless it was at a council meeting. Then we describe what the awards process would be. We have a link to the form that I'll show you in just a minute. And then we have, you will need to upload these things. If applicable, it'll support DEC screening form, the results of the calculator tool, and so on. So this is the announcement. People had a chance to look at this. There will be some tweaks, but are there any thoughts or reactions to what we had shared so far?
Not seeing any theme. Looks good to me. Dean, you're muted.
Thanks. So this is just a placeholder while I get the online form up. So this is the current form. We have an introduction, and we collect information, and we hopefully make it as painless as possible. It's got more things in it than we had originally intended because of the CWSP policy, things that we know that we have to ask for. But basically, I'm going to go through it very quickly. It's all a single page. I know it seems like it goes on for days, but it's not as bad as it seems. We think it's a little bit better to show everybody all of the questions rather than have to go from page to page to page. So initially, applicant information, who you are, organization, email, basic stuff. Description of the project. Please enter description. We point out it can be the same as the one that's in the watershed database, because we're discussing. We need to have a project ID. To have a project ID, you need a name and a description of a project. So use that description. We just want to have it in our system. Confirm that you are aware of the CWSP policy and Act 76. You just tell us, yes, I'm aware. And then you tell us the project type, tell us the project phase, and you give us the ID number. So this is collecting what is hopefully basic information, things that you already have to do in order to do the form. We are right now asking for latitude and longitude because it is something that DEC has seemed to want collected at every phase of the project. So we're asking for it. This is something that might go away, but if it doesn't go away, we also make it clear. This can be, for many projects, there's already the latitude and longitude from the project database. So we just say, use the same one. This is something that might go away if we determine that it's not absolutely necessary. Costs, please enter your best estimate of the phase of the cost. We just want people to put in numbers to just keep it cleaner, but that might end up going away. But we're just looking for a number. How much are you asking for? It's generally going to be the same. The cost will be what you're asking for because we don't have a match requirement. But because of the CWIP policy and because some projects may have a match included, we just want you to tell us what the match is. We say that matching funds are not required if they're just used for eligible. So we're asking for it. It might be zero most of the time, and it's not required. The total project costs, this is where we are acknowledging that DEC wants to have an idea of the total costs. And we're saying, if you are going for, say, a 30% design, the total costs are going to be a guesstimate. And so we say, give us a ballpark. And we basically use some in the same language that the Basin 5 Council is using. After the cost, we get into a section on the phosphorus. So we're basically saying, you have to enter how much phosphorus reduction, unless it's a project where we don't require it, and identification and development projects, it's NA. But you have to use a calculator tool to come up with that number. So we want you to give us the number, but you have to use the tool to come up with a number. And that seems like it's unavoidable because we're told that we have to use the calculator tool, the interim tool, to get those numbers. We ask for a copy of the tool later. So what's the annual reduction? Some projects have a one-time reduction, so we just are asking about it. Maybe this will go away if it's so rare as to not really matter. We ask about the design life. We ask, what's the as I was, saying to Jim earlier, what's the estimated O&M cost? So we do ask for it, and if we factor it into the formula, we will have that information. Conformance with the basin plan, for now, this shows what we were talking about earlier. If we were to change it so that it somehow says, if it's in the implementation table and then we add points for the priority area, perhaps that will be adjusted. But it's a pretty simple one-to-one. We have a list of criteria and how many points, and you just choose how many points it will be. Co-benefits, as we had said, we have these 6 categories. You tell us how many of the categories are addressed. It's not asking for a lot of work or documentation because we don't want it to be burdensome. It's going to rely on the applicant to give us a fair assessment of how the project addresses those. That's what we're doing to start with, and maybe we will change that in time. The screening form. We've been talking about the screening form. You must include a screening form if it's seeking funds for 30% design filings or implementation work. So this is something we're confronted with. So if you're doing those things, you get a copy of the form here and you'll be asked to upload it at the end. So there's a bunch of supporting information that we would like people to provide. We have one place where people can drop or browse to get the files, but we basically use this as a checklist. You upload the files here, and then you tell us, yes, I provided it. Yes, I provided it for a bunch of things. So if the landowner support letter is required or some indication of landowner support, you tell us yes. Screening form, yes. Or in the case of it's exempt, you wouldn't need it. But the calculator tool, you tell us yes, it's uploaded. The budget, you tell us yes, I uploaded a copy of a budget. If someone has their own budget or a budget from a consultant, we're not asking them to reformat it. If someone says, I don't know what format to use, we can suggest one and we will. A map, upload a copy of a map. Project schedule, upload a copy of the schedule. And then when they're done, click submit, and they've submitted their application. So like I say, overall, it looks like it's a mile long, but it moves quickly. Thoughts, reactions, questions about that form? Or the idea of using the form?
16. I'll say it would probably be great to also have it as a Word version, if possible, of at least the questions being asked, because it's at the bottom that you need to upload everything. So I feel like I could see people filling everything out and then being like, oh, I don't have any of these things to upload yet. I already filled this out. Can I save it somewhere? Type of thing. And then just like a general, I'm not seeing project types for assessment or for monitoring. And I'm wondering how we are supposed to be billing for monitoring and if assessments are being funded under this, or if it's really just ID development, design, implementation. Like, can we do a stormwater master plan, an assessment, and can we fund it through this? I guess there's operations and maintenance. I don't know. Seems pretty vague, but other stormwater master plan project ID. Okay. Sorry, I'm looking at the list in the screening tool is not that same list, I don't think.
So the list that is here is the list from the policy, or the table that is attached to the policy. So these are all the CWSP eligible. We want these to be, yeah, we don't want to exclude anything. So does it help you that someone can apply for something, project development or the assessment projects, stormwater master plan? So is there some assurance that this list includes those? It sounds like the issue.
Yes.
Okay, so the issue is that what about the screening form and those? Because those, there's this issue with the screening form in that it's like intended to be multi-purpose, but it's really not. It's really primarily or better suited for the design. And so, you know, what do you do if you're trying to do an assessment and you're going to provide information in this? And that's why I was saying earlier, we've toyed with the idea of our version of it, but that would, I think that could, we would have trouble if we did that. I don't think DEC would want us to have our own version.
I guess then I'll just point out the lists are different, and it'd be great if they weren't. It'd be great if the screening tool could be updated by DEC to include all of their CWSP eligible project types.
Good point.
I just want to make sure we note that Jake had to leave another meeting. It is 1 o'clock. Sorry, folks. Other thoughts?
We will definitely make it possible for someone to download the whole list of questions. So right from the very beginning, I will add to the introduction something that says you can download the full list of questions here, and someone will have a Word version, and they can kind of basically prepare to do the form. But what we really are hoping to avoid is to not use the form. We really want to use a form. And so hopefully that will be enough of a balance. Someone can do their homework before and then sit down and fill out the form once. But since they've been able to download all the questions, they won't have any surprises.
I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, questions from anyone else? Seeing none. We are over time. Dean, I don't know how we want to maybe we can skip the policy, public policy discussion for today, and we'll circle back in 2 months.
Yeah. I would like to guess, I would like to get some sense from folks. You know, we've talked about trying to have an application round by March, but I felt like we would need to be very close at this meeting in order for it to be settled in March. Do people feel like between now and March, we can have it ready? Are people feeling positive? Or is there anything that people are feeling not positive enough about that we really have to do some legwork in between?
Lindsay, is that a hand raise or is that a, you like it?
It's a hand raise.
Okay.
I definitely have some concerns, but also we just need to get this out and we need to start getting projects in front of us. So I feel like we can rush and get it ready as long as there's the big caveat that if it doesn't work, we can make changes.
I have no doubts that the second version of this will not be the same as the first. Okay, that's really all I needed. If there were, if this was headed off the cliff, I would want to hear it. I'm not hearing that, but we have a record, and Day and I are going to be talking more after this meeting and highlighting some things. So I have what I need, and thank everybody for their time.
May I suggest that if folks do have a project they plan to submit, that they start that screening tool now? You're gonna want to. Just 2 cents there. I guess that'll be my question to you, Dean, too. If people can't get responses from folks by the time the application's due, what do you want us to do?
I will say that's a question that Catherine and I talked about this morning. And I guess the thing I can say is that depending on the project, we have to figure out a way to get money for what would amount to development work. Even if somebody thought that they had a project that was ready or almost ready to get funding for design, without the form filled out, they're not. And so we have to figure out a way to get some money out so people can do the development, get the form completed. So I'm telling you, we understand the need, but we haven't figured out the mechanism, but we know there is the need. And now, unless someone says, well, no way, I don't want to go back to something that anybody's going to call development for something that I'm going to get, but I think it might work so that we have a low bar. You get, if you get however many dollars to do what you need to do, and then you can come back in with an application. Does that solve the problem? It's going to mean a delay. It's not like getting the money for the development work as part of the design work. And I don't think that we can I don't think we can do that. But I think we can find a way to get development money out. So 3 months delay or.
Okay, we'll watch that unfold.
I mean, yeah, I'm open to other ideas.
I know, sorry, everybody. I know in the past, NRCC has let us say, yeah, I emailed them 3 months before this deadline, and I emailed them again every month, and they never got back to me. I will keep emailing them, type of thing.
Okay.
They've let us do that before.
Okay, now that I understand it a bit better, it may be that this is something we just want to make sure DEC makes it clear that they aren't going to hold this back. They're not going to surprise the CWSP, and they're not going to surprise the partner organization that's applying that it wasn't good enough. I mean, we basically need something that from DEC that says in that situation, that will be good enough.
Sure. Kent, you came off mute. Did you want to say something or?
Well, I was just going to say that we're awaiting results of a Love Block grant that will address that. There are other ways of skinning this cat, and we're all looking and we're all trying to do things and, to get these assessments in. So, I think it can all work together.
Thanks, Kent. All right. With that, shall we adjourn and push the next agenda item to March?
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. If you do have any questions on the public participation policy, ask me or Dean. I think Dean sent it out to everyone about a month ago. All right. Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Sarah makes a motion. Ken, you seconded the motion. Any abstentions? Any opposed? I never asked about opposed on any of my other votes today. I am so sorry. Oh my goodness. All in favor? Everybody raise their hand. Great. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, everyone.
Thank you.